fundament of everything.
Let me explain. No,
really accurate.
I've never said that once in my life.
I'm sure you can read your book when you're out there.
No, I've never said that once in my life. Okay, what liberalism is, what it requires in order to be liberalism, right? So that's the first question. Yeah. If you look at the works of John Locke and Thomas Hobbes and those guys, yeah, and not just him, Rousseau and others, Montesquieu, all of them, they talk about a state of nature. Okay. Now the state of nature is a primordial state. It's actually it's a fictitious state. It's a mythological state. So if you look at the first parts of the books of the Leviathan, for example, right? I won't be long. If you look at that, what Thomas Hobbes, for example, he describes that human beings primordially are in this state.
I have read about this as well, by the way.
So that's,
if you're summarising for the audience, that's fine. But
no,
you don't need to summarise for me.
No, that's important. This story, for me, this is a forgotten part of liberalism because they represent the axioms of them, right?
Okay.
Right. So it's very important that we touch upon this, right? So when we talk about liberalism, you have to understand, you have to start where those philosophers started, yeah? Where the state of nature, right?
I don't agree.
You agree?
No, I don't agree.
You don't agree?
No, because the social contract isn't the most fundamental part of liberalism. It's an important idea within it, but not every philosopher within the liberal tradition specialises in this social contract idea. So, if anything, what you might, if anything, the most fundamental sort of idea within liberalism is that any restrictions on liberalism need to be justified, and that liberalism is kind of normatively beneficial and good.
Okay, can I explain?
That might be called the fundamental principle of liberalism.
No, there's no one who says this, right?
Well, I can show you many people who say it. I can show you many people who say it.
Let me explain something,
Okay.
right? Go back to the state of nature.
Okay.
All right?
Yeah.
Why is the state of nature important? Before you look at your phone, just look at me.
Well, I'm just getting my...
You're the one who came to me, you wanted to talk to me, right?
I'm listening at the same time.
No, because when you're on your phone, I'm not convinced that you're listening to me. Do you get it?
Okay.
I want this to be like a free-flowing conversation, not to get score points or whatever, yeah?
Okay.
I get what you're saying. It's not wrong what you're saying, yeah? But what I'm saying is that there is a backdrop that you're forgetting about, which is an important backdrop, okay?
Okay.
So if we look at the beginning, different philosophers looked at how the state of nature was conceived. So Thomas Hobbes, he saw that human beings are evil by nature. He said that they're evil by nature, right? And John Locke, on the other hand, he said, okay, you've got human beings that in the state of nature, that all of them are kind of fighting with each other in this kind of like primordial jungle, if you like, yeah? And that they have to give up parts of their freedom to the sovereign, if you like, in order for that sovereign to then protect them. Do you accept this, yeah? Now, this transition from the state of nature to a social contract is the most, if you don't have it, my question to you is, what do you then have? So for example, if you have a state of nature, right, and you don't have a social contract, this is my question. If you have a Lockean or a Hobbesian state of nature, and you don't have a transition to a social contract, the question is, what will remain? That's my question.
Okay. Yeah, so the answer to that is, if you're talking about what will remain within, like, and the answer coming from a liberal tradition, kind of what we need to understand is that liberalism is very broad, like more broad than you've given it credit for. I'll just read something that will justify my point.
All right, fine. You can read it. Okay. Do you understand the question? Because we don't want to disrupt the discussion. Discussion is...
No, this will answer the question.
What you have a state of nature, and this, by the way, is widely accepted. I don't think anyone even you said John Rawls, yeah?
Yeah.
John Rawls has something called the veil of ignorance. I'm sure you're aware of it, yeah? Are you aware of it?
Yeah, I'm aware of John Rawls'
can you
ideas.
explain it to me so I'm sure that you're aware of it?
Well, I know within the context of like social contract theory, as imagined by John Rawls, he imagines that there was this collective spirit that for people to be free, they'd have to act in accordance with this collective spirit. And so that was his idea of like liberal, what it meant to be free. And so his social contracts were imagined acting in accordance with his collective spirit.
Right,
so he's actually quite he's quite a liberal for a liberal person.
So John Rawls, his veil of ignorance, there's two main things about it, because you said John Rawls, right?
Yeah.
And you're right to say that there was a development of liberalism from John Locke to John Rawls.
Yeah.
And in universities now, John Rawls is probably the last people do PhDs on. He's one of probably the last kind of major scholar contributor to the liberal tradition. Major one, right? After him, you don't have anyone of his caliber whatsoever. So, but the veil of ignorance is something a little bit more technical than what you've described, right? So he basically asks people to imagine that if you come out of the situation that we're in with all of its inequalities, and we imagine we ask the question, what would be the most fair society, such that if we were to be positioned back into society, the lowest, basically the person with who's dealt the worst cards, if you like, were to be given the best deal. And he gives different names to different principles and so on. But the point I'm making is, they all start from this philosophical, kind of ontological, you could even say mythological, frankly, starting point, whereby there's some kind of thought experiment, there's some kind of description of nature which is not empirically justified. So in other words, when John, can I explain what? Let me explain. When John Locke, when he talked about the state of nature, and he talked about people fighting each other and having the right, for example, to protect their own selves in that state of nature, or when Thomas Hobbes talks about the evil state of nature, which was, by the way, represented in that book. What was that book called? It's what these GCSE students, it's called, what do they read? It's,
Lord of the Flies.
Yes, thank you. Well done. Shit, well done. Lord of the Flies, it's represented in that. Because Lord of the Flies, William Golding, he takes a Hobbesian approach to it. Now look, I don't want to go into technical details. The point is, they all start, my main point is, they all start, whether it's John Locke, Thomas Hobbes, or John Locke, or Montesquieu, or Rousseau, whoever you want, it's impossible to start with a philosophy unless you have this transition from the primordial state, otherwise referred to as the state of nature, into some kind of social contract. Would you agree with that?
No, that's not the fundamental necessary part of liberalism.
So could you give me a counter example then?
I'll justify my statement, and I'm going to read from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, which is a peer-reviewed kind of online publication.
It's well known. It's good. It's not bad. It is peer-reviewed. You're right.
Sorry. Wait a second.
No problem, take your time. But just to make sure that you understand the question, right? What I'm saying is, how do we become socially contracted? My proposition to you is that in liberal theory, it usually starts from a point of state of nature. Then there's some kind of transaction that occurs between those individuals that are free in the state of nature and a sovereign who they then cede the power to, right? That is referred to as a social contract. So I'm saying that the vast majority of liberal theorists, up until John Rawls, would subscribe to that kind of transaction, that kind of storyline. Go on.
All right. So, the reason why this is too narrow a reading, and you've presented too monolithic an understanding of liberalism, even classical liberalism, you've presented too monolithically.
It's because
quoting from the Plato Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. By definition, Maurice Cranston says, a liberal is a man who believes in liberty. Mill too argued that the burden of proof is supposed to be with those who are against liberty, who contend for any restriction or prohibition. The a priori assumption is in favour of freedom, and he said that in volume 21, page 262. Recent liberal thinkers, such as Joel Feinberg, Stanley Benn, and John Rawls, agree. This might be called the fundamental liberal principle. Freedom is normatively basic, and so the onus of justification is on those who would use coercion to limit freedom. It follows from this that political authority and law must be justified as they limit the liberty of citizens. Consequently, a central question of liberal political theory is whether political authority can be justified, and if so, how. For this reason, social contract theory, as developed by Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, and Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and Immanuel Kant, is usually viewed as liberal, even though actual political prescriptions of, say, Hobbes and Rousseau have distinctly illiberal features, insofar as they take their starting point as a state of nature, in which humans are free and equal, and so argue that any limitation on this freedom and equality must be justified. The final relevant quote that needs to be read is...
But by the way, what you just read there and what I said is almost identical, you know that?
It's similar. It is similar.
So where's the refutation?
The refutation is that the fundamental, the necessary,
a priori assumption.
Yeah, it's this
liberty.
idea.
Yeah,
that,
no doubt.
That's the most important thing. There are many thinkers. But there are many thinkers within the liberal tradition who didn't talk about social contract theories. Who didn't kind of deal with that sort of idea.
Those 2 points.
Like, for example, someone like what's his name, Voltaire, for example.
Okay.
He never spoke about the social contract theory, but he's still a liberal thinker because he espouses this ideas.
In his book, Democracy in is that Voltaire? No, Democracy in America.
Okay.
Yeah. There is discussion.
Voltaire?
No, not by Voltaire.
Okay.
This was written. Who wrote Democracy in America? It's written by.
Is it by a founding father or?
No, write it down. I
Okay.
forget the name of it. But there is. Voltaire does mention social contract, by the way. We can double check that. But going back to the point.
Yeah, but anyway, the other important thing is that liberalism is also a tradition of conflicting ideas. The ideas often conflict with each other.
We're not actually in disagreement.
Okay, yeah. You need to give your audience that idea because otherwise they're going to think that liberalism is just law. Because it is because what you went on to do in your video is that you kind of gave your account of the social contract and you used it to say, therefore, once there is a social contract, any law is valid. And then you said, except for, like, the state can't infringe on property rights. And this is explicitly something from Hobbes. From Locke. Because, for example, Rousseau would have a totally different idea of the purview of the social contract. And so, like, when you gave your viewers that idea, they're thinking, oh yeah, liberalism is only about property rights.
You have to allow this to be too.
Well, you did speak a little bit when you were talking about the social contract as well. So if you agree that you've given too monolithic a representation of liberalism, then that's one of the important things that I needed to refute you on.
You have to allow it to be.
So that's one point that I made. That's that.
Okay, is it my turn?
Yeah.
James, let's keep it pleasant because otherwise, if we're just talking over each other, it's not going to work.
Well, okay, but I didn't try and interrupt you when you were talking, so
okay. So here, I agree with a lot of what you said. What you read out there basically was amazing how it actually represents. If people rewind what I said and listen to what you said, they'll find that about 80% of what I said was what is within what you read, right? The state of nature and all that kind of. I mean, you're actually validating what I'm saying, right? You are. Now the point is that I made, and if you look back on the video footage, you'll hear me saying this again, is that the standard understanding of liberal theory is that you start with a state of nature, and then there's a transaction that's made, usually referred to as a social contract, and that gives legitimacy to the sovereign, right? That is what Rousseau said, that is what Locke said, that is what Thomas Hobbes said. Now if you don't have that social contract, then the sovereign doesn't have legitimacy, doesn't have a mandate. The a priori assumption that you mentioned, I didn't disagree with that. Locke said that himself. He said that there's only one or two things, literally, that you can have a right to protect. One of them was property. So he had that a priori assumption himself, right? Which is the a priori assumption of freedom in the first instance. Now, the reason why I was making this point to you, and this is just to cut to the chase, because there's a lot of technicalities here and a lot of people will be lost, right? You agree and I agree that liberalism is more than just John Locke and John Stuart Mill and Rousseau and all those names I mentioned. I use them as additional as supplementary evidence. I can't stand here and start mentioning 30 or 40 names. It's impossible, right? It's not an essay I'm writing, it's a conversation I'm having. Okay, now that's point number one. Number two is, the point I'm making is that there's a similarity. This is my main argument, all right? The reason why we had this discussion in the first place is to show you that the dominant ethic here in the West, which is liberalism, and social liberalism in particular, there is conceivable within the framework of social liberalism that you can have, situations whereby, for example, slavery can exist, you can have situations and legitimized through the social contract, you can have situation where, for example, the death penalty can be given, in certain contexts, treason laws can be put in place, which, by the way, I'm saying are, for all intents and purposes, the same kind of laws that you criticize regularly as a Western liberal, not yourself, but maybe you. I don't watch your videos. I watch the ones that me and you are in only. Yeah. So no, I'm not. Right. So no. It's just a review. But what I'm saying is, it's as conceivable through a liberal social contract understanding, a contractarian understanding, that those laws, which are like, for example, death penalty for non-allegiance to a state, even cutting hands off, amputation. I mean, it's not inconceivable that a liberal state can allow that within its paradigm. Just as it's not inconceivable, of course, within the Islamic state for the same thing to be allowed. Now, the reason why I'm bringing this to your attention is to let you know that what you have to offer me is basically nothing, right? When liberals and people from the West tell Muslims that you have to modernize, my argument to you is, for the sake of argument, let's say we're going to modernize, right? Let's go with it. Now, let's say we become liberal and we completely change. And by the way, most of the Muslim countries are probably premised on or predicated on some kind of liberalism anyway, right? Even though they're dictatorships for the most part. But let's say for the sake of argument, we go with that model. My point is, what really is going to change? A dictator, or let's just say a sovereign, or a leader of some sort, if he ceded that power, he can decide to have Sharia law, right? Literally all the punitive laws of Sharia law within a liberal framework, and that can be legitimized through the social contract. That's my argument. So what I'm saying is you basically have nothing to offer me, right? And you can't say on liberalism, this is my argument, secondary point, you cannot say you can't have a sanctimony on liberalism. You can't say, well, cutting the hand of the thief is wrong. Or, for example, the punishment of death penalty is wrong. Because why? It's conceivable through your system as well. Okay. That's all it is. So my argument is you have nothing to offer us, and what you're criticizing us of, in principle, is possible in a liberal state. That's my argument. And unless you can unlock those principles and say that contract theory doesn't exist, then that's going to be a checkmate and a final bottom line, really, I believe.
Okay. I'm glad that you tried to make that argument, okay? Yeah. So going back to just the one that we almost finished with before, kind of, as part of our agreement that liberalism is a broad tradition with often contradictory ideas between one liberal philosopher and another liberal philosopher, it is therefore invalid for you to have said, as you did in your video, that one of the fundamental pillars, one of the pillars of liberalism is what you represented of the social contract theory. Because for one thing, the social contract theory that you represented was just John Locke's. Like the social contract. Rousseau. Well, no, because Rousseau's social contract theory would be very different to what you represented. Because, for example, why? Why? Because you said that one of the things that social contract theory couldn't be used to justify violating would be property rights, whereas Rousseau would totally disagree.
Okay, right. But I'm saying more rights are taken away.
And so you need to.
That's a minor point.
It isn't. No, it's an important point because people are going to come away with this idea of like, oh, liberalism, it's so monolithic, it's so simple.
All right, so I think you've done a good job, and we've shown the people that's not monolithic.
Yeah,
we accept
exactly.
that liberalism is a broad tradition that spans for more than 300 years, yeah?
Yeah.
Or maybe even, 300 years. So it's not monolithic, it has varying opinions within it, and often, like you said, contradictory ones.
Yeah.
But my point was this, is that
I'll get to your second
it's
point
conceivable
now.
within that framework to have these outcomes. I'm not saying that all liberals, I've never said this, James. I've never said that all liberal thinkers say this.
Okay.
I've said it's conceivable principally within the framework to envisage these outcomes. In other words, the outcomes where punitive laws, for example, the punitive laws of Islam, can be implemented in a liberal state through the mandate of the people, ceded to the sovereign master or for the represented elected, and then they can actually do those things. So it's conceivable.
I get that.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
My argument is one of conceivability.
Yes. Okay.
Potentiality one.
Yeah. And I'll agree with you that it is potentially possible. Okay, it's potentially possible for a democracy to turn into a dictatorship and start implementing taking away freedom of speech, taking away freedom of religion, re-legalizing slavery. That's not impossible. Okay. However, this isn't an argument.
Democracy is a different ideology, by the way.
It can be, but I'm not representing this abstract, non-democratic liberal state. I don't know what that means. I'm representing
James, can we pause here for
modern.
A second?
Because we're going to be talking. We aren't going to be talking about a hypothetical, non-democratic liberal state. You want, I think, to show that a Sharia state with a Salafi understanding is not inferior to a modern.
I've never mentioned Salafism.
Okay, but you are a Salafi.
I've never mentioned Salafism.
Are you a Salafi?
I'm a Hanbali. I call myself a Hanbali. I'm Muslim.
Oh really?
Hanbali.
Okay, I didn't know that. So you're a Hanbali madhab follower.
Yes.
Okay, so even it's the same is true under a Hanbali madhab. Okay.
Now you've read about Hanbali madhab.
I know some certain things, like Muqtasar of al-Qiraqi, for example.
You've read al-Qiraqi, yeah?
Not the whole thing, but I've checked parts of it.
I can guarantee you it's not translated into English.
It is translated into
al-Qiraqi?
Yeah. Muqtasab al-Khiraqi.
Translated in English?
Yeah, I've got it here. Do you want to see it?
Yes, please show me.
Okay, sure. It's not the whole thing.
Khiraqi's thing is this big,
yeah,
mate.
it's not the whole thing. It's just a section of it.
Okay, let me tell you something.
I've got a section of the Khiraqi.
Before you continue, Ibn Qudama, he wrote a book called Al-Mughni, yeah?
Yeah.
Do you know who Ibn Qudama was?
I can't remember.
If you're a Hanbali, if you know about Hanbalism, you need to know about Ibn Qudama, alright? Ibn Qudama is one of the major scholars of the Hanbali madhab.
Yeah, but Khiraqi came before that, though.
Yes.
Yes, so this is more fundamental.
Let me explain to you.
This directly translates Hanbal's opinions.
That's not Al-Khiraqi, bro.
Yeah, it is. It will be.
It can't be Al-Khiraqi.
I printed out a few pages of it to show the point that I wanted to make.
Okay, you might have a few extracts that are translated, but the whole Khiraqi is definitely not translated into English. I can tell you that from. I can guarantee you.
There's some PhD students that has done it.
I looked at it myself. I went to the library and I wanted to see.
Well, it might not be. Okay, no, but this is.
Tell me where it's translated. I'd like to know.
Okay, I'm getting it.
Al-Mughni is not even. I don't even know if Mughni is translated. If anyone knows where Mughni is translated, Al-Mughni is, by the way, an explanation of Al-Khiraqi. Yeah.
Okay.
So Ibn Qudama did Al-Mughni is the yeah. Okay, this is not Al-Khiraqi, bro.
This is part of it. Okay. So this is the Muqtasab al-Khiraqi, a 10th century work of Islamic jurisprudence, translated by Khalid Anas, PhD, New York University, 1992.
Did you translate all of it?
No, well, I only printed off a bit of it. I printed off the chapter of jihad.
Oh, jihad only,
yeah, because it's important.
All right, fine.
It's important, but
if they got a PhD guy from New York that done it, that's interesting. I'll look into it. But Al-Khiraqi's book is not a serious thing.
Let's not get into the Hanbali madhab. Let's not get down there. So because
but I'm telling you,
the point
you haven't touched Al-Khiraqi.
What do you mean I haven't touched this?
No, that's an English translation. I'm telling you.
So it must be wrong, right?
No. Al-Khiraqi is such a big book that in order to cover that, you need a lifetime. Yeah, and that's why Ibn Qudama, when he wrote the book called Al-Mughni, his discussion of Al-Mughni was in reference to Al-Khiraqi's book.
Yeah.
Mughni itself is a massive book that I'm sure you haven't read. There's no way you've read it.
I haven't
and by the way, you can never read that book. Yeah, because you need to read 3 books before that book. You need to Amd al-Fiqh, Al-Kafi, Muqna'. There's 3 books that come before Al-Mughni. So in other words, for someone like, sorry to say, Yani, because we need to be honest and intellectually honest. Yeah. For you to approach Al-Khiraqi, you have to have read 3 books in between, which is at least to get an understanding what's going on.
No, you're trying to make it seem like rocket science. This isn't true, man. Yeah, because Khiraqi,
it's not true.
Because like the Khiraqi, he quotes Ibn Hanbal's opinions. You don't need to know rocket science in order to understand. If Ibn Hanbal says that sea campaigns are superior to land campaigns, that speaks for itself.
Let me
so
Khiraqi,
you can understand Khiraqi without reading these other books.
Yeah, I know you can't.
Yeah, maybe not in whole, but certainly you can read parts of it.
It's like a doctor. Let me tell you what it's like. Seriously, sorry to say. No, James, I have to be honest with you. No, I'll be honest with you. It's like someone who's going into medical school, yeah? And he goes straight to 4th year trying to read the books of the doctors.
It's not like that.
It's exactly like that.
No, it isn't. Because these books, they're accessible. They're not rocket science.
I promise you.
No, it isn't. It's just a collection of rulings, and it says what the rulings are about.
Bro, I'm telling you,
it transmits Ibn Hanbal's opinions. And if Ibn Hanbal gives his opinion on something,
and is it one opinion?
In general,
no, it's never one opinion. Bro, look at Al-Mughni.
For jihad, it only quotes Ibn Hanbal's opinion.
James, listen to me, yeah? Don't, please, in front of me, I have to ask you kindly, don't pretend you know, okay? Do not.
I only claim to know about specific things.
I'm telling you, my friend, I'll be honest with you in front of everyone here.
No, if you're trying to say I don't understand a single thing from Al-Khiraqi, no, that's nonsense. I can just read this out to you, and everyone here will be able to understand it as well. It's not hard, you're gatekeeping.
It's called Jahl Murakkab. It's called ignorance which is compounded, where you think you know and you don't know. Let me tell you what, James,
we can disprove this now. I can just read a section of Al-Khiraqi and everyone here will be able to understand it. It's easy.
It's not easy.
We can do a little experiment here. It is.
Let me explain why it's not easy. Can I explain why?
You can try, but it's not going to be convincing. Yeah, let's get back to the main.
We will, but let me explain to people, right? If you look at, for example, one chapter of Al-Mughni, yeah, which I spent 2 years trying to understand one chapter, yeah, and I understand the Arabic language and understand what's being said. 2 years I didn't get it. I'm not gonna lie to you, yeah. I didn't. If you ask me now, Kitab al-Buyu'a, which is the chapter on transactions, in Mughni, yeah, I'm thinking, why is it difficult to understand? Because number one, Ibn Qudama, when he's quoting Al-Khiraqi and he's also quoting Ahmad ibn Hanbal, he's quoting like 6 opinions of Ahmed sometimes. 3 opinions, 2 opinions, 2 riwayas, 4 riwayas, whatever. It's never one. It's,
no,
and
okay, I thought you meant kind of opinions from different people.
Ahmed himself.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Himself,
he did give different. He did give different.
He gave
opinions
different
sometimes.
rulings.
Yes,
So now
okay.
there's the question of tarjih. Which one did Ahmed actually? Number 1, what did he say? Number 2, what is the sanad? What is the correct what do you call it? Chain of narration of Ahmed. Number 3, which one do the scholars of the Hanbali madhab see as more prominent than other? And that's a big discussion, akhi. I'm telling you.
But not every issue has multiple. Not every issue has multiple rulings.
Almost all of them do, and some.
So some don't.
Some don't.
Okay, so you're able to understand some of them without thinking what's the correct
it's
one.
not something that you can approach. Go on, next thing.
Okay, let's go. So this,
you can go to something called
argument.
Hamd al-Fiqh. It's translated by Hatim al-Hajj. He wrote a book. It's orange. For those who want to learn about the Hanbali madhab, the first thing you got to read is something called Umda. It's probably one of the best things you can read. It's called Umdat al-Fiqh, written by Ibn Qudama. It's a small book in orange. In English, it's called, I don't know how they translate Umdat al-Fiqh, yeah? And the translation by Hatim al-Hajj. That's where you start. You never start with al-Khiraq. It's like going to a Tabari in the beginning. It's impossible.
That's the best thing to go to, a Tabari tafsir, you mean?
Yeah, but you're not going to know.
If it was in English, everyone would read it because it's the best.
in English, I believe, but it's not easy to.
I don't think that's some. Can you direct me? I'd love to be directed to where an English version of Tafsir Tabari is.
The Jordanian government have this thing where they translate it.
Okay, that's great. I'm really glad to know that. I really want to read it.
You know what? Read al-Khiraqi, brother. Read it.
I've started. It's fine. But okay, let's go back to the main issue. Okay.
Yeah.
So you gave an argument. Which is that kind of, is it possible for a kind of liberal democracy, a liberal kind of modern society to end up taking away freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and reintroducing slavery?
Through the social contract.
I'm going to say it is possible.
Right.
However, that isn't an argument for a Sharia society being any better, because you need to compare the two.
I agree,
and
James.
it is more likely.
James, I agree.
It is more likely for those things to happen under a Sharia society for 2 reasons. One, because when you have an absolute ruler like a caliph, it is much easier for that one person to become, malevolent and a dictator and an oppressor than it is for an entire democracy to start oppressing its people. Because in order for one person... No, let me finish.
Democracy or liberal? I mean, they're 2 different things.
Today, they always go hand in hand. They do. There's
they don't.
Okay, what is a liberal society that's not a democracy?
Hitler's, for example, Hitler's 1933 reign represented a democratic society which was not liberal.
Okay, and we're not here to defend that.
No, I'm not saying you're here to defend it. You gave me an example.
Okay.
I'm giving you one.
Okay,
the point is you can have illiberal democracies and democratic tyrannies.
Yeah.
Okay, so therefore
we need to continue the comparison though with a Sharia state.
Do you understand this point?
I do, but it's still important to make this point though, which is that kind of one, it is more likely for an absolute ruler like a caliph to become.
So wait a minute.
No, don't interrupt me because I let you kind of do a full point. Okay, so one is that a democracy of a group of people where there are checks and balances to power and an independent judiciary is much less likely to become malevolent and dictatorial and oppressive than a single absolute ruler, because absolute power corrupts absolutely, and there's only one person and he holds all the power. Secondly, in a Sharia state, to begin with, it is much more likely that freedom of speech will be taken away, that freedom of religion will be taken away, and that slavery will be reintroduced, because a Sharia society, especially under kind of Hanbali madhab, and especially under especially under classical Hanbali law, would say that slavery is legal, if you're going to try and claim that slavery is illegal under Hanbalism, then you're just going to make you're going to kind of undermine your own credibility here. So
slavery is illegal under, and we'll talk about slavery.
And so all these things that could potentially happen to make a liberal society unpleasant are much more likely to happen under a Sharia society with a caliph. So this argument against liberalism doesn't work because it applies more.
James,
it applies more to kind of your society.
James, thank you.
Your solution has more of the problems that you're pointing to the other side.
No problem. First of all, my argument was never one of morality. Yes, I always made this clear. It was always one of conceivability and potentiality. So I never said that. My argument here is not Sharia is better than liberalism or liberalism is worse than Sharia. My argument was always that it's conceivable just as it's conceivable in an Islamic state that you can have these powers that are ceded to the authority and then they enact, for example, the death penalty, cutting off hands or whatever, those exact punitive laws are conceivable in a social contract understanding of liberalism. You capitulated to that. You said you agreed with that.
Yeah, but it's less likely to happen.
No, now you're making...
That's the probability.
But
just saying, like, one could happen, one could happen. If the other is 5 times more likely to happen, then that's the bigger problem.
I have let you say your thing.
Sorry.
What I'm saying to you is that this was an abstract, first of all, perfect. Right now, we actually agree, James, yes? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so let's stick with this agreement, because it's perfect. You come to my way, I come to your way, we might see each other agreeing the whole way through. We don't know. Sometimes in Speaker's Corner you have miracles like that, right? So on the first point, we actually agree that you're saying, fine, it's potential and it's conceivable in the liberal framework and it's conceivable in the Islamic framework. Done. Okay, so we both agree on that point. My secondary point was, therefore, introducing a new system does nothing in terms of the conceivability. Now, the point is this. The point you said about the independent judiciary, there is a problem with that because in an Islamic state, you do have an independent judiciary. And that's well known because you have the Khulafa Rashidin al-Mahdiyin, the major Khulafa that were tried by the judiciary, like Ali ibn Abi Talib, for example. The famous story of him being tried against a Jewish man, and then the Jewish man, you know the story. I'm not sure if okay. Basically, Ali ibn Abi Talib came, and the judge was being a bit more friendly with Ali, using his nickname, and Ali was very infuriated by this and said, "Why don't you call him by his nickname as well? The Jewish man that he was against, he called." So the point is that the judge has...
There's counter evidence to that, though, which is that there are many other examples within kind of Islamic history of the Khilafah being able to lean on the jurists and favour jurists who would give him preferential treatment.
The reason why I made...
So there's much more much more room for corruption where you have an absolutely powerful ruler. So just because you can point to one example of it being good... But
we're talking on a nice, like, it's a conversation now, and I think we're getting somewhere. But before this continues, let's not de-scope the parameters of the discussion. Because in the beginning we said, okay, abstractly you agree and I agree on the same point, the conceivability point. Secondly, now we talked about the second point, which is we're talking about the religion. You said something about the judiciary, and I'm saying that why did I mention Ali? Because he's one of the Khulafa, and the Prophet said, "Alaykum bi sunnati wa sunnati al-khulafa ar-rashidin al-mahdiyyin min ba'di 'addu 'alayha bin nawajid." That upon you is my way and the way of the Khulafa ar-rashidin al-mahdiyyin, and of them is Ali, with consensus of the Muslims. So I use him as an evidence here to show that this can happen, that the judiciary can impinge on the rights, if you like, of the ruler. So the fact that you have an independent judiciary is something which is upheld by Islamic law. By law. Now, if you say in history that's not the case, I probably agree with you. So yeah, in history you're right. Probably you can find counter examples of that. But my case is not a historical one. It's a principle one. Okay. So now that we agree with the abstract, now we can ask the question about implementability. And you said you made a point here, which is a secondary piece of argument. You said that it's more likely that these laws will be enacted, yes, in an Islamic state than in a liberal one. And I reject that, actually.
Okay.
Yes, let me explain. No. I totally reject it. And I'll tell you why I totally reject it. Now, I'm doing a research on this, and it will come out at the end of the year. Okay. And I'll tell you what the research entails, okay? In terms of historical records, the historical record is very... In the early times of the Abbasid Empire, the Umayyads before them, and the Abbasids, it's a little bit difficult to find court records, yes? So I can't really speculate, and you can't really speculate as to what happened in that time. But in terms of the Islamic... Can you let me... Because I've done the research. In terms of what empire, if you like, the Islamic Empire had most bureaucratic records, is the Ottoman Empire. There's no doubt about that, yeah? In terms of the whole Muslim timeline, historical timeline, the Ottomans have something called the Sijil, which is literally, I think, around the early 1600s, to be fair, or the late 1500s, there was clear records of all of the court cases, including the punitive laws that were done. So in other words, we know how many times in 100 years, for example, from say 1530 to 1630, that, for instance, the death penalty was given. We know how many times that the apostasy law was enacted. We know how many times that, for instance, that someone had their hand cut off. And those things are in records in Istanbul, and they can be accessed for researchers like yourself. If you want to go and research them, you can do it. And we also know, by the way, and this is my point of comparison, we also know, ever since 1776, when America became obviously independent and so on, the time in which America became independent, we know how many times they have used Article 3 of the Constitution, which is the treason law, which, by the way, is identical to the apostasy law. And I'll explain why it's identical. I'll explain.
Okay, try.
No, it's 100% identical, right? And by the way, I'll give you 2 pieces of evidence and you will have no comeback on this one.
Okay.
And you know, it's not about comeback. You will agree with me. You will actually agree with me.
Okay.
The so-called apostasy law in the Islamic State is equivalent to the treason law in America that still stands to this day and is part of the Constitution, right? And why is that the case? Because it's talking about non-allegiance to a state. They define it, the Americans define it in a certain way, and in Islamic empires they defined it in a certain way. And there are certain things that if you do, that you can be killed in America till this day in certain states. And certain things in the Ottoman Empire, as an example, that if you did, you could be killed because of treason. Literally, it was treason.
But is that Islamic law, or is that the national, like country law?
No, this was Islamic. They were Hanafis, and they were basing it on quite strictly on the juristic opinions or jurisprudential opinions of the Hanafi madhab. So what I'm saying is, if you look at the data, which is something I've started to do, but I'm going to start doing more because there's actually a lot of data. It's not an easy research to do, but you have to look at it because it's actually in Ottoman Turkish. It's not even in the Turkish language of today. Yeah, it's a different language. If you look at the data, you'll find, yeah, and this is something we can't verify either of us now, that if you look, for example, in the period of time after World War II, in America, 1945 onwards, and you compare that with the period of time, for example, in the Ottoman Empire, you'll find that the treason law was enacted more in the United States of America than it was enacted in Ottoman Islamic Empire. And the reason why is because after World War II, you had Japanese people that were killed over the treason law because they were seen as treacherous to the American state. And that you have at least 6 or 7 cases, some of which got away with it and some of which were actually killed because of the treason law in America. Now, why do I say it's identical? It's identical because the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ in a hadith, which is narrated in Bukhari, in Kitab al-Shurut, listen to this very carefully, it's very important. Kitab al-Shurut, which is the book of conditions, where it's one of the biggest hadiths in all of Bukhari. He's having a discussion with one of the people, right? And what he says is one of the conditions of the treaty that they have to do between the pagan Arabs and Muslims is that he says if anyone becomes an apostate from the religion, listen to this carefully, right? This was the condition of who? Of the pagan Arab. He said, if anyone becomes an apostate from the religion, bring them back to us. Now the Prophet Muhammad, he agreed to those terms. Listen carefully, he agreed to those terms. Which means it's absolutely conceivable to imagine a state of affairs from Islamic jurisprudence where someone can become an apostate and no consequences will be put on them whatsoever. And the same is the case with Hudayfa, when he had the list of munafiqun. They were people that were not Muslim for all intents and purposes. They were not believers, and there was nothing that was done to them. So there were lots of examples of that. Now the point is, when is it that those individuals will be given the death penalty? That's the question, right? And the answer to that question is when there is a social contract, the same kind of social contract that exists in liberal states and still exists in America to this day, and there's seen to be some kind of rupturing of that social contract. It's connected to the contract between the Hakim and Mahkum, or the leader and those who are being ruled over. Just like in America, the same kind of dynamic exists. Now, like John Gray says in his book Black Mask, he says that now the reason why we have different conceptions right now is because of the fact that, you know, liberalism is shrouded with the jargon of social sciences. So when we say, for example, treason and treachery and constitutional rights and so on, you're already thinking of different kinds of connotations and imageries in your mind. But when I say apostasy and so what I'm saying, for all intents and purposes, the law is the same kind of law. There might be different requirements in terms of, okay, what's the threshold that must be reached? But in terms of implementability, I'm actually making the argument that it's more implementable and has been historically more implementable in America in that time period that we're talking about, say for example from 1945 to 1975, than in Ottoman Empire.
Okay.
That's my argument.
Okay, cool. So the first thing before you start making kind of this current argument is you just finished off the idea of the independent judiciary, and so you claimed that you gave an example of the judiciary acting in a genuinely independent manner. Okay, and so what I'd say was, like, while it is feasible for there to be an independent judiciary, you might be able to say, like, oh, this is what the Islamic ideal would be. The fact is that it is not robust and it is not pragmatic. It is an idealistic vision, because if you actually look at history, where you have a absolute ruler, a caliph, historically that has been easy for them to exert their power to favour a particular school, particular set of scholars. It is easy for them to imprison scholars, imprison duelists. Yeah. So saying, oh no, but we have an independent judiciary too. Like, you have a weak independent judiciary, whereas liberal democracy has a strong independent judiciary.
Go back to the discussion on.
Okay, and then on apostasy, like there are several things that are kind of wrong with what you've said. Okay, because you've presented this idea that apostasy is totally equivalent to just treason. Like, it's just treason, and you've given evidence, but you're also going against the understanding of the actual Muslim scholars when they wrote those apostasy laws. Like any of the four madhabs, the authoritative position. Like any madhab book, like kind of the Distinguished Jurist Primer. Like I've got a book of jurists rulings here. Like, this is by Al-Qadi As-Safadi, and it'll summarise the four schools. It won't say anything in here about treachery or treason or helping a foreign state.
You'll be surprised, because I don't think I will be. No, but if you brought that up, so I can actually counter that.
Well, you've been speaking for like 10 minutes. So you need to let me kind of like present fully the case for why you're wrong.
By the way, what's his name? Jonathan Brown. Yeah, I think it's Jonathan Brown. In the Yaqeen Institute, he's actually done a whole. I think it's him.
Yeah, but he's a dishonest person.
Well,
he twists the evidence so badly.
Right.
He's awful.
He's done a good.
Don't go to him. Don't go to him.
No, he's done a good.
It'll turn out badly.
On this
the Yaqeen Institute is rubbish.
Oh, no problem. That's just subjective. But
well, no, it can easily be proven. They publish absolute garbage.
James,
no, but the thing is, it is still kind of my turn to like present your. What?
I just want to say one point.
Okay, make one point.
Okay, quickly. He made an article, and the reason why I brought this up is because it actually has in it counter examples of what you've mentioned. So he's put in that article, I think it's called Apostasy in Islam, so you can Google it, right? And he has a paragraph dedicated to where it was called tabweeb in the Arabic language, where fuqaha or jurists have basically where they have put the apostasy law in terms of under what heading. And you'll find that with his evidence, and I think he mentioned 2 or 3 different madhab, that they put it under things like highway robbery and the treason, the treacherous, and all that kind of stuff. So there is, if you're talking from a jurisprudential perspective, there certainly is evidence for what I'm talking about. I was going straight to primary texts. So look, I've given you 2 sets of arguments now.
Okay, but there's also primary texts that kind of give a different version from what you're talking about. So first of all, in terms of like the jurisprudence, like here's one jurisprudence book by it's The Mercy in the Difference of the Four Sunni Schools of Islamic Law by Al-Qadi As-Safadi. He was a Qadi of I think 14th century Damascus. Okay. And all it says here is chapter 21, the had punishments. There are 7 crimes which incur had punishments. They are apostasy, rebellion. Note, rebellion is different from apostasy. Fornication, slander, theft, highway robbery, also different from apostasy, and wine drinking. Apostasy. Apostasy is to leave Islam by word, deed, or intention. The Imams agree, and that refers to the 4 kind of Imams who founded the 4 schools of Sunni Islamic law, that anyone who apostatizes from Islam must be killed.
Yeah, but
and that's the basic understanding. But I can go to so many other resources.
No, James, let's be fair.
Let me continue making my points, okay?
Right, go ahead. Yeah, can I just say one thing before you continue?
No, because you've already had like quite a few interjections, and I didn't interrupt you.
I was going to say that.
No, come on, be fair.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so your idea. So here's another argument, a logical argument for why this idea of like apostasy is just treason, why that's totally fallacious, it's totally bunk. Okay, so I'll read it because I have it written down here. It says.
So is your position, just so we clear, is your position that wherever?
So I just want I've got it here because I want to continue. So the question is like let's say there's a Muslim baker living in a Muslim country, and he decides that he believes in Buddhism, and then he kind of says, I'm a Buddhist, and he continues as a baker, working as a baker, making bread every day, as a Buddhist. How has he committed treason? What foreign state has he aided? How has he attacked his own state? The answer is he hasn't in any way. And so no, because you'll have your chance to. There's some more things I need to say. Okay, so this comparison you made between the American punishment for treason, which is about actual treason, actually kind of working against the state and helping a foreign state, that is not equivalent to this example of apostasy, which is simply theologically telling. I'm not throwing out the argument because your understanding of apostasy is not authentic to the actual religion and the actual jurisprudence. So you've constructed a false idea that apostasy is simply treason, and that's not true. No, because like I didn't interrupt you when you were speaking, so I will be done soon. You will be done soon. I didn't give you any time limits. What is this?
I don't know. Okay, so you're speaking over me.
I let you speak.
No, but can I speak back?
You will. You'll have your turn to speak back. I promise. You know. Okay. So that's the second thing for why this idea that apostasy is simply treason is not true, not authentic to the Islamic tradition, and not well justified by the primary Islamic sources. Now, as for the primary Islamic sources, okay, you mentioned this hadith or this long hadith.
Yes.
Can you like just quickly? Do you remember what the reference to that hadith is? But the number. Okay, do you remember what number it is?
The Book of Conditions.
Okay, but there's probably like 400 hadiths in it.
Different nusakh have different things. It depends on what book you open. Not every book have the same numbers, bro. You have to know how. You have to.
No, but if you Google them, any of them will turn up.
Bukhari, the Book of Conditions.
Okay, fine. And so that's not the only evidence for the apostasy law, though. The other evidences for the apostasy law are other hadiths that say things along the lines of whoever changes their religion, kill him. Okay, and so and in fact, if you actually go to kind of books of fiqh, they're much more likely to reference that hadith as the evidence. Okay, so your hadith doesn't. The hadith you quoted doesn't cover the whole story.
You have to allow me to come back.
So you can come back now.
Thank you. Right. Now, going back to your first point, the hadith that you're talking about, "Man baddala dinahu faqtuluh," whoever changes his religion, then kill him. Let me tell you something. No Islamic scholar has taken that on prima facie value. And I'll tell you why. Because if you take it on prima facie value on a generic level, then what that means is if someone becomes a Muslim, then you have to kill them. Why does that mean that? Because the actual wording of the hadith is, whoever changes his religion, then kill him, right? So that means if someone's a Christian and becomes Muslim, then you should kill him. If you take it on a literalistic, prima facie kind of understanding, which no one does. So obviously now, what this leads us to is a secondary point. In what context? That question, in what context, must be asked. Otherwise, we're going to kill people who become Muslim. Do you understand? So here, I'm telling you, that I'm contextualizing it for you, and I'm giving you two major things. Number one, now, if it's true, and here's an argument that I don't think you're going to come back from, all right? If it's true that the traditionalist jurisprudential understanding of someone changing their religion is generic in every place and every time and is not linked to a social contract, that would mean to say that there should be an abundance of fatwa from all kinds of centers of the Islamic world saying that people in the West, for example, who are non-Muslim, who are Muslim before, should be killed.
I'm not making that argument. So
okay, perfect. All right, so we agree then, because here this is exactly perfect, right?
But you can't say therefore it must only relate to treason.
No, James. No, what you've just done there is you've agreed with me on a critical point. Because if you're saying to me that it's not to do with the change of belief, but to do with the change of belief publicly in a certain context where there's a social contract, then what have we said?
I don't agree with all those statements just made.
But this is what it is, because if it wasn't like that, then if someone was a Muslim in this country, like we have many ex-Muslims, yes, they come to the park. What would be the ruling of them? That we have to catch them and kill them? But no one has ever made that fatwa. Yeah, I know I'm talking about Salman Rushdie. That's a blasphemy law thing. Yeah, different mas'ala altogether. I'm talking about if this was generic, and it's not generic, and that's why I gave you that counter example in Kitab al-Shurut, where the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said he made a condition with the people of Quraysh. He said to them, they said to him, will you, if they become disbelievers, will you bring them back to us? And he agreed to that term and condition, which shows that there is a degree of malleability in the ruling, and it's not one size fits all. Number two, and this is very important, my argument was never, and this is where I believe you did strawman the argument, I never said to you, okay, I never said to you that treason is the Eurocentric definition according to legalistic definitions of the US. That's an anachronistic way of reasoning. I said, in essence, what does it entail? Treason entails non-allegiance, a public non-allegiance to a state. Now, if someone expresses a public non-allegiance to the United States of America, and they do so in such a way which is vocal, that could potentially, according to Article 3 of the Constitution of treason law, that could lead to their death. And by the way, in terms of implementability, America has the worst track record. Look at what they've done to, for example, Anwar al-Awlaqi's son, his name is Abdurrahman al-Awlaqi, yeah? Who was a boy, a young boy, who they feared would grow up and be radicalized, and they did a drone attack on him and killed him. There was no trial involved in that. There was no, and they did so under military and executive rule, by the way. Yeah, so don't try and talk about implementation, because in reality, in terms of implementation, secular liberal America has the worst record, probably in all of human history, in terms of its foreign policy violations and its killing and torturing people without trial. Yeah, no, hold on, because you talked about a historical case, so I'm being honest here. Now, what my argument was, and listen to the argument carefully. Listen to the argument carefully. My argument was, what is treason? It's essentially not showing public non-allegiance to a state to a degree where that particular state deems it dangerous for its civil protection of the society. So they can actually implement a death penalty. I'm saying that exists within Islamic law, and it exists within American, for example, law, constitutional law, that goes, by the way, back to Edward III. Because a lot of people make the argument, that this is medieval law. They say, look, Islamic law, why are you going back to the barbaric times of medieval law? Did you know, I'll tell you something, did you know if you look at constitutional renderings, it goes back to Edward III of England, because the founding fathers of America predicated a lot of the legalistic definitions, constitutional definitions, on English law, English statute law and common law, going back all the way back to Edward III, which is medieval times, as you know. So this whole argument is a very weak argument. I'm making a very straightforward claim, and it has to be disregarded, or otherwise it has to be disproven for you to make your point today. I'm saying that in both Islamic system, principally, abstractly, on philosophical basis, an Islamic law, and in, for example, a liberal country, I'm using America as the example because it's predicated on liberalism. Right. There is a potentiality where non-elite, listen to my phraseology very carefully, because I'm very careful with my words. A public non-allegiance to a state could result in death. That is the essence of what treason is, what treachery is. Now, if it's conceivable in both, I'm saying in history, implementation, America, you're saying that it's less likely to happen in America. I disagreed. I said, in America, the historical record shows, if you look at the Sijil, which is the Ottoman Empire history records of court records, you'll find that treason law, very careful, respective to the proportion of people living in that population, is much less common than treason law implementation, and also, if you want to add to it, torture and death without trial. Now, in order for you to say no, it's not the same, and the liberal model is one which guarantees more life or whatever it is, prosperity, you have to show a historical example. You have to show with facts and figures and statistics how it has been the case, for example, in liberal France or liberal America, and you can only compare it with the Ottoman Empire because that's where the records are complete. No, really. You can only compare it with the Ottoman Empire because that's where the historical record is complete in the Islamic world. I'm telling you that from experience. You have to show where in a space of time, let's say time X to time Y, there has been less or whatever. But then we have to contextualize it. Has there been wars there? Have been this and that? That's the job of the researcher. But your premise of saying that it's less likely to have death penalty for non-allegiance to a state in a liberal... That's not what I said. If it's not what you said, then we agree. Do we agree then?
No, I don't think so.
So all right, so then you have to provide the evidence.
I think you've tried to change the arguments. Okay.
No, I've always said the same thing. Go back to I said non-allegiance to a state in a public way. You have to show, my argument is this, non-allegiance to a state. Because if it's an Islamic state, allegiance will be based on Islam. For Muslims, not for non-Muslims. For Muslims, it's based on Islam. For Americans, it's based on nationalism. Why is one epistemically higher or better or whatever than the other? That's a very Orientalist or Eurocentric way of looking at things. I'm saying that in essence, the law is the same. But in implementation, actually, the Islamic law means that you have less people dying from this particular punishment. Now, you have to provide counter-examples. I've given you the historical record, and it's open for all researchers to check. You have to provide counter-examples of this and say, actually, in implementation, this has not been the case. If you can't provide that counter-example, then not only have I made you agree with me in terms of principles, but you will have to agree with me in terms of history and implementation as well. So, can you give me the examples?
Sure. So the first kind of minor points that you raised, well, it's not the first, but one of the minor points you raised is foreign policy, and you said kind of something along the lines of America has been far worse in its foreign policy violations than presumably kind of an Islamic system. And that's a really laughable claim to make, especially in regards to like Hanbali madhab, because like within the classicalism, because within don't interrupt me. I haven't
the argument. I didn't say that. I said that in regards to the issue of punishment without trial.
You said foreign policy violations.
I gave the example.
But you said foreign policy violations.
With
so let's talk about foreign policy.
Caveat. With their own citizens.
How is that foreign policy then?
It's foreign policy because they use drones and they kill the people if they're in another country, but they're still citizens. For example, I gave the example of Abdurrahman al-Awlaqi, who's Anwar al-Awlaqi's son, who was a boy, which means it's prepubescent, 5 or 6, and his daughter Hala al-Awlaqi, whatever her name is. And they got a drone to come and shoot them dead, and they were kids. They were not even, and they did it, and it's out in the public record because they were afraid that they would grow older and they'd become radical. Now, my point is, this is a gross, example, frankly, of where you have America using this kind of logic of non-allegiance. Listen to me carefully. Using the logic of non-allegiance to kill people that are underage. Now, tell me where that's in Islamic law anywhere.
Okay. Yeah, you aren't allowed to kill kind of children in Islamic law.
There you have it. So
however, there are other kind of far more obvious examples of foreign policy, what we would call crimes or violations. Namely, the fact that within classical Islam, namely from within the fact that you don't want me to say this, but I'm still going to say it. Namely, from it's not a fallacy. Oh, you're afraid as well, aren't you? That's why you delete all the comments. That's why you block all the comments. Okay. So no. It's within the argument because you did raise foreign policy. Okay, the fact is, no, you're going to keep on interrupting me because you're so scared of this point. The fact is, within Islamic foreign policy, the conception is that there is Dar al-Islam and Dar al-Harb. There is the land of Islam and the land of war. And so by default, like an Islamic legal system would understand within the classical tradition that they are at war with the whole world. Okay, that is the case. That is the case. Apart from a temporary truces. That's allowed.
Don't let him go into this discussion because
you're afraid. Because that's offensive jihad, and that's agreed within the Hanbali madhab as well, and that is foreign policy.
No, let him finish. Do respond to it. If it is a side point, respond to it.
You wanted to talk about foreign policy, and you mentioned foreign policy. Okay, I'm going to get to apostasy. Don't worry. So you need to compare the foreign policy of offensive jihad against the whole non-Muslim world, apart from temporary truces.
According to which school?
According to all of them. Yeah, all of them.
You're lying.
Yeah, and I'm not lying.
You're lying.
No, you don't know anything.
I don't know anything. You're a liar. You're a liar.
No, you're okay, but you're not good enough. You're not good enough.
Let me quote sources.
No, I'm dealing with him right now.
Are you scared?
Okay.
What am I'm going to use.
He's running away from
the question.
I'm going to get to your question.
Are you scared?
No,
are you scared?
Are you scared? So one system, the Islamic system, believes in war against the whole world, and then America doesn't believe in that.
He gets paid for lying.
Now,
you have to understand. He gets paid for lying.
Now
he's a paid liar.
Apostasy. Okay. Yes. Yeah, I remember what you said. You said that you had that you were trying to define apostasy in terms of non-allegiance to a state, and that is a fallacious equivocation. That is not true, because apostates were killed. Because apostates were killed within an Islamic state simply for changing their religion, not for attacking the state, not for committing treason. Okay.
Examples. Ask him for examples.
because it doesn't make sense to define it any other way.
Why?
It doesn't because, and this is perfect, okay?
Yeah, why?
The reason is because within an Islamic state, it is not necessary for a citizen to be a Muslim, and this isn't according to me or according to secular reasoning. This is according to Islamic reasoning. Why? Because there are non-Muslim citizens of the Islamic State, and they are considered to be legitimate citizens.
They give bay'ah.
And so when
as Muslims or as Christians or Jews,
all of them have to give bay'ah. All of them have to give bay'ah. Every citizen has to.
Do they give bay'ah as Muslims or Christians or Jews?
As Christians and Jews.
Fine. So
yes.
hold on.
No. I'm still making this point. No, why can you say as soon as you change your religion, you're committed? Well, he's worried about me. He's not letting me talk. Okay. So there's this idea that by changing your religion, you're committing treason. It's such nonsense, and it's really bloodthirsty as well. Like why are you happy when you find out about people kind of in Muslim countries being executed just for changing their religion? Like, do you like rub your hands together and think, oh, those murtads, they deserved it? No. When you stick by your Muslim brotherhood, no, because this is an important subject, because you're publicly advocating for an apostasy law based on changing your religion in your ideal Islamic state in the future. You don't want to have an ideal Islamic state in the future.
Hold on.
I want to advocate for that. Oh, okay, actually I'm advocating for that. That's what you want.
Why are you even talking to this guy? You can't have an honest discussion.
No. I let you speak for quite a while, didn't I? And you're the one who's been interrupting me just now.
2 minutes?
I think you were speaking for a bit more than 2 minutes before you started. No, because you were constantly interrupting me during that time. Make it more like 5 minutes. Make it more like 5 minutes. No, because I didn't interrupt you at all for your kind of big spiel. Okay, and so your conception of kind of apostasy being treason, it doesn't stand up to any scrutiny. It doesn't make any sense to say that someone who has changed their religion but is just living as a law-abiding citizen within that country is a traitor who has tried to damage that country, who has tried to overthrow that country, who has tried to rebel against that country. And that is not the understanding of the actual kind of classical jurists. They did not say kind of, for example, kill the apostate who commits rebellion. They say kill any apostates, because it is a theological doctrine. It is not based around treachery. Okay, and so and also you made the point that I have to if I want to compare like this track record of religious freedom, because this is the issue. The issue is religious freedom. You said treason. You said treason. You said non-allegiance. But that's fallacious though. What we're actually talking about is religious freedom. Okay, because like America, and because that's the truth. Because it is not.
If you want to refute me,
no. I've already refuted. Why your equivocation of apostasy with treason is false. Okay, and so the point is we can make this comparison not just with the Ottoman Empire and America. We can also compare it to the Umayyads and the Abbasids, because we can look at their actual fiqh books. We can look at books of kind of law that were used in that time period and other kind of historical records. Okay, so. And so the question is like this serves as a proxy indicator. You don't need full law records to show that one legal system allows religious freedom and the other doesn't. Okay, and so if we compare like which has more kind of religious freedom, it's obviously going to be the liberal democracy, because No, you said it was feasible that a liberal secular democracy could take away freedoms in the same way, and I'm saying it is much less likely for that to happen.
That's not my argument.
You did make that argument earlier. You said it's about feasibility. You said feasibility. That was your specific word. Okay, and so yes, it is possible, it is feasible, but it is also much more likely that these freedoms are going to be taken away in a future Islamic state. Other freedoms like slavery, for example. I'm going to make an extra point in addition, okay? Because we talked about several freedoms. One of the freedoms was freedom of religion. Right. The others within this original video we're talking about is also freedom of speech and slavery, okay? And in freedom of speech, we can also make that comparison, because, for example, America clearly has much greater freedom of speech than an ideal Islamic state, because an ideal Islamic state would likely make it illegal to speak blasphemy or say impermissible things about Mohammed or the Holy Book, for example. This can be well found within, for example, the Shafi school, within the kind of reliance of the traveller. And the next freedom, and so there's one. There's another.
I'm going to take what I've given you.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. I don't mind that. Yeah, and so there is one area again in which the liberal secular democracy has more freedoms and is more safe in the preservation of those freedoms than an ideal Islamic state run according to Sharia law. The third way, that's the liberal society is better than the ideal Islamic society, is in terms of slavery, because that's what because you did mention slavery earlier, okay?
No, I mentioned it in the previous time.
In the video, and we're talking about the video.
Do you want to have a fruitful discussion? Or
I do because this is fruitful. This is fruitful.
No, he's gonna say you're scared to hear the word slavery. You're scared to hear the word. Yeah, that's the game he's gonna play.
Within kind of Islamic legal systems, slavery is legal. It is legal to take slaves during jihad. There are many Muslim scholars today who say that this is what the ideal Islamic state in the future should entail, like Salaf Fawzan, who, by the way, if any madhab he follows, he's most closely aligned to the Hanbali madhab, okay, which you think is so great, even though it says that slavery should be legal and that apostates should be killed, okay, and so, like, if you want. And so here's another example in which liberal society is far better than Islamic society. The fact that liberal society clearly has outlawed slavery.
You know, this is going to be a long talk.
Yeah, you can make a long talk. Yeah, that's fine. And so and the track record of Islamic legal systems in terms of slavery is terrible, because they say that it should be legal and slaves should be taken, like citizens should be taken as slaves during jihad. Okay, and this is well attested by history and any book of fiqh you'd like to open.
All right, so you've taken 5 minutes of my time. I'm gonna do 2.5, and he's gonna take 2.5. Right? So this is what I initially told you, right? 2 arguments I was making, you did not face them head on. You had to start talking about other things, and this is the problem. If there is an argument that I'm making, first of all, represent what I said properly. Number 2, answer it directly. The argument I was making was simply this. I was saying, number 1, in terms of conceivability, both America and Islamic states could initiate or could implement a death penalty based on non-allegiance to the state. Now that is how, the question of how to define treason. You can't use an anachronistic definition of treason by the Americans and then anachronistically impose it on an Islamic state. Just like you can't use a treason definition from Islamic state and impose it on America. What we're saying is, according to the Islamic definition, treason is where you are severing a social contract between the people and the government. If the person is already a Muslim, I'm not talking about Christians and Jews, and they have, it's called bay'ah, which is literally translated as pledge of allegiance. Listen carefully, pledge of allegiance. If they have initiated a public pledge of allegiance, and they have therefore predicated their existence in a public space, in a social environment, on such pledge of allegiance, and they rupture it in a public sphere, then it has exactly the same effect as someone who commits treason by, for example, disavowing themselves or disconnecting themselves or rupturing themselves away from the social contract, which on an American model is predicated on nationalism and secularism. So what I'm saying is, you can't say that, well, the American definition is different, we have to use the American definition to implement it on the Islamic definition. That was my first argument. It's conceivable that non-allegiance to a state, whether it be to an Islamic state or an American state, can result in death of subjects in either of those states. And you agreed with that. That's number 1. Number 2 is, and here's my argument, if you look at the Sijil records of the Ottoman Empire, if you go all the way back to the late 1500s, all the way to, I would say, the 18 to 1900s, and you can do it now because it's available for public review. And you look at the amount of times that treason or ridda laws have been implemented in that time, which, by the way, we have a clear record of. You will find that as a proportion of population, that is less implementable than has been the case with American policy, especially considering the post-World War II environment where lots of Japanese people were killed and others were threatened with kill. If you add to that citizen Americans who have been killed because of their perceived non-allegiance to that state, like Abdurrahman Awlaki and his daughter, who are children who were drone killed as a result of their as a result of their non-allegiance to the state, so-called, or fear of them being non-allied to the state.
Or even in Syria, the British government.
Is that your 2.5 minutes?
Yeah, then you'll just to finish the sentence, you'll realize that actually in implementation, we have physical records, historical documents, and statistical evidence to show that in fact, this law has been implemented way more in America than it has been in the Islamic countries, particularly the Ottoman Empire, where we have the most complete records. Adnan.
Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I didn't want to indulge with James because I had stated in the past, so I'm going to be talking to the audience. I believe he is not an honest person. He deliberately lies, and I don't want to launch ad hominem attacks on him. I will deal with the issue at hand here. We have seen in recent history that Western governments in particular have carried out extrajudicial killings of their own citizens due to the concept of or perceived treachery, right? David Cameron did this with some Syrian people, some individuals in Syria with British citizens, British citizenships. Likewise, the Americans did it, right? There is no room, there is not one reference in the entire Islamic literature that allows extrajudicial killings of Muslims or non-Muslims under any circumstances. I will repeat that. There is no room within the Islamic literature, be it Hadith, Quran, or jurisprudential literature, where extrajudicial killings of any person are allowed. Okay? War is a different thing, of course. War, you know, you don't know what's coming and what's going, right? So, when it comes to the legal system, no. It is legally absolutely abhorrent and prohibited in Islamic literature. And how do I know this person is actually a dishonest person? If he did a basic search online, earlier he said that there are only two categories of the world according to Islam, Darul Harb and Darul Islam. Remember that? Are you a witness to that?
Yes.
Right, he said that. If you went on Wikipedia, basic divisions of the world in Islam, they have three categories, right? So something as basic as that for him, okay, because he obviously doesn't have the ability to read any further. It's Darul Islam, Wikipedia, okay? The article is Divisions of the World in Islam. Divisions of the world in Islam. I know it pains.
When you quote
it hurts.
Speak book.
Are you scared, James? Are you scared? Are you scared? Are you scared?
Sorry,
Are you scared? Okay, no problem.
Sorry to interrupt. Sorry.
You look scared, okay? Darul Islam, number one, the house of Islam, the abode of Islam, where the Muslims exist with non-Muslims who are living with the Muslims under contract. Darul Harb, a hostile land, like the Romans were fighting the Muslims, the Persians were fighting the Muslims. Later on, the Habsburg fighting the Ottomans. That's Darul Harb. And then there is Darul Sulh, Darul Ahad. That's a very important distinction, not mentioned by James quite deliberately. I don't believe that he has read all of that and he doesn't know about it, right? What is Darul Sulh? Okay, Darul Sulh, according to this Wikipedia baby. Okay, I know. Are you scared?
No,
Are you scared?
I'm saying you. I'm giving you more.
You were saying earlier we're scared to hear this. Our terms, Darul Sulh, are terms used for territories that have a treaty of non-aggression or peace with Muslims, right? This is a point James quite deliberately failed to mention. So here we learn something. We learn that Islamic sciences are quite nuanced. You can't listen to cowboys like James in the park and take that as authority. Go to Islamic literature. Wait. I simply recommend a book, an academic source, written by a non-Muslim, Wael B. Halak. The book is titled The Sharia Law, published by Cambridge University Press. Go and read it. It's an open invitation to Muslims and non-Muslims. Read the source and then you will see what James actually is. He looks like a cowboy. You will come to realize he is a cowboy. Okay, now the last point, slavery. You know these words, these guys, these Islamophobes, they come to the park and throw these words at you. Apostasy, slavery, killing, murder, these flashy sounding terms. I will invite you to read a book on slavery. Jonathan, I'm finishing my last sentence. Okay. Jonathan A.C. Brown, an academic from the US, teaching at Columbia University or Georgetown University, one of these two, Georgetown University. He has recently authored a book called Slavery in Islam. Before you listen to a cowboy, go and listen to an academic, read his book, Slavery in Islam, Jonathan A.C. Brown, and you will get the bigger picture. Period. I have nothing more to say on this. I don't want to indulge with this guy. You can continue. That was my 10 pence.
Yeah, a couple of things. So, we've reached, I guess you could call it an impasse, where you want to insist that kind of simply changing your religion is the same thing as treason, and I've given my argument for why well, you have been making that. You've been making that a equivocation in effect when you were comparing treason in America to changing your religion. Okay, so apostasy does not equal treason. Okay, and so I don't have. So like we don't want. No, but there's no point in us repeating each other. We're just going to go around in circles. Besides, excuse me. Like it is my time to talk.
Yeah, go ahead.
Secondly, about what Adnan Rashid said. There isn't much to say because he doesn't. So first of all, Adnan Rashid called me a liar. He is actually an incredible proven liar, and one clear example of him proving that he is a liar is the fact.
What's this got to do with you talking about him?
Because so what? He made the accusation. He can reflect it. Okay, he is a liar because.
All right, then I should leave then. If you're going to talk about Adnan Rashid.
If you want to leave, then go. But like, so secondly, kind of Adnan Rashid is a proven liar because he claims that. I showed evidence that he is a supporter of Abdullah Faisal. Video evidence, okay, of him speaking, supporting Abdullah Faisal, who was a hate preacher who was convicted for, what was he convicted for? Incitement of murder, okay? And in front of everyone, when I asked him, why did you tell Muslims to support Abdullah Faisal in Abdullah Faisal's lectures? He said, that's not me, like, you're a liar, you're a hate preacher. Even though it is him. And many people have come up to me afterwards saying, yeah, we remember him from the lectures, it's clearly him. So the fact that he's calling me a liar, even though to this day he will lie at will, with no shame, with no misgivings, just shows that he is an incredible liar, okay? And secondly, about the point he made about Dar al-Harb and Dar al-Kufr and Dar al-Islam, okay? So I did give a slightly simplified account. It isn't much difference though, because Dar al-Kufr, for one thing, it is not universally agreed upon if you look at the actual jurisprudential books of Islamic law. But secondly, the justification for Dar al-Kufr is mainly based on the Ethiopians who the early Muslims had a treaty with, okay? But other rulings within Islamic law say that treaties must be temporary and you can renew them if they want, but any treaty with the non-Muslim foreign lands must be temporary, and then you return to a state of war, a state of offensive jihad. And so nowadays, Muslims who claim, like Mohammed Hijab, to be followers of the Hanbali madhab, they claim that, oh no, that there isn't constant war against the non-Muslim world. Oh no, that's not true, that's not true. They are whitewashing and lying and hiding their history. I could quote right now the actual opinions of Ahmad ibn Hanbal. In fact, I will, because you remember he said, oh, Muqtasar al-Qaraqi, you don't have that. But let me show you what Muqtasar al-Qaraqi from Ahmad ibn Hanbal, who Mohammed Hijab follows. I'll show you what it says about jihad and the foreign world, what the foreign policy of kind of the Muslim state is. And so this is from the Muqtasar of al-Qaraqi, which transmits Ahmad ibn Hanbal's works, rulings rather. It says, kind of on book 44, Jihad, he said, he referring to Ahmad ibn Hanbal, jihad is an obligation based on the whole community, and if it is carried out by some people, then others are excused from fulfilling it. Ahmad, may Allah have mercy on him, said, I know of no act after duties of a Muslim which is superior to jihad. Naval actions are superior to land campaigns. Every pious and impious person may participate in a campaign. Each unit fights the enemy nearest to it. A complete tour of duty is 40 nights. Voluntary jihad cannot be performed without obtaining permission from one's Muslim parents. However, if a general jihad is proclaimed, no permission is required from the parents. As in all religious obligations, parents need not be obeyed in the failure to perform them. He said, people of the scripture and Zoroastrians may be fought against without calling them to Islam because the call has already reached them. Idolaters must be called to Islam before being fought against. People of the scripture and Zoroastrians are fought against until they either accept Islam or pay the jizya, readily being brought low. Also, other disbelievers are fought against until they accept Islam, okay? So when Mohammed Hijab attempts to claim that Western foreign policy is so egregious when he is advocating for Hanbali Islamic law, which clearly, as I've just read out, says that offensive jihad is meant to be, offensive holy war is meant to be waged against the whole world until they accept Islam. It is total hypocrisy, because yes, Western foreign policy is bad in many ways, and it can be improved. There's much to be improved. But it is better than a foreign policy that says that war should be declared against the whole non-Muslim world until they accept Islam. So, like that, and the other thing Mohammed Hijab was saying was that, and one more point about Dar al-Kufr, Dar al-Islam, Dar al-Harb. You'll notice it's very funny how Adnan Rashid quoted Wikipedia as his source rather than an actual book of fiqh. I'd recommend that people actually look at books of fiqh, like, for example, The Distinguished Jurist Primer by Ibn Rushd, if they want to find out about Islamic law, rather than following Adnan Rashid's faulty knowledge. And are there any other points to be made? I don't think so. The main point is that if you want to compare like secular, modern, humanist, liberal democracy to an ideal Islamic state, the facts are that in an ideal Islamic state, slavery is going to be part of jihad, whereby whenever there's a war...
What they have in Libya today.
Very similar.
Young Africans,
yes, very similar.
Thousands of young Africans being kept in detention camps.
I'm not ignorant. I'm quoting from books of Islamic law. Do you know? Okay. So anyway, are you going to choose a system which has slavery illegal, or are you going to choose a system whereby slavery will be legal in the future? Are you going to choose a system where freedom of religion is allowed, where people can change and convert their religion as they wish? Or are you going to choose a system where if you change your religion from Islam to something else, then you're going to be executed? This is the well-agreed position. Even though some people like Jonathan A.C. Brown try to dishonestly claim that murdering people who change their religion from Islam is simply treason. It is not treason, that's total nonsense. He is a charlatan. He is a charlatan who has tried to whitewash slavery. He's a complete liar. And who else? Adnan's a liar, that's been proven. Mohammed Hijab, unfortunately, wanted an excuse to walk away. He probably didn't want to talk about offensive jihad anymore. The facts speak for themselves. If you read any book of Islamic jurisprudence, like, for example, how about a summary of Islamic jurisprudence by Dr. Saleh Fawzan, read what it says about the death penalty being different for Muslims and non-Muslims. Read what it says about blood money being different from Muslims and non-Muslims. Read what it says about slavery being legal in the future. It is so obvious which is the better system to run a just, fair... what fiqh do you follow, my friend? Ahmed Ali, what fiqh do you follow? What fiqh do you follow? No, if you're not Hanbali, what are you? If you're not Hanbali, what are you? Okay, yeah, not all Muslims are Hanbali. I was talking about Mohammed Hijab because he said he is. Yeah, he said. He said I follow the Hanbali madhab. What?
He said he's Hanbali.
Yes.
I agree with what I'm saying.
Depends what parts.
Very good. So he's claiming he's Hanbali.
Yeah, come a bit closer if you want.
Because you have to follow the Hanbali madhab, you can have 3-4 opinions.
Yeah, that's true. But on some positions though, there's only one opinion. No, because I'm talking about issues. No, I've just read out Ahmad ibn Hanbal's opinion, word for word, transmitted via Kiraki, okay? And so there aren't multiple of Ahmad's opinions on this issue. So I agree with you that on some issues, Ahmad related many rulings about the same issue, like maybe this is a valid ruling, maybe this is a valid ruling. But I'm not talking about those issues. But what fiqh do you follow? What fiqh do you follow?
On the very same case. No, that's not point.
No. What's Islamic law?
He knows he's lying.
I'm not lying. I'm not lying. I've read Ahmad ibn Hanbal's views. I've read Ahmad ibn Hanbal's views right now.
Remember, majority of Muslims are not Hanbali.
I know. I'm talking about Mohammed Hijab.
Yeah, this man comes here and says Muslims. Like as if all Muslims.
No, I'm talking about classical Islamic law. Okay. So this is orthodox Islamic law.
You'll be a liar if you say that. Let's get Islamic law. Do you want? Let me speak with him. Let
Come a bit closer so you can be picked up. Yeah.
I don't, look, I really do not admire speaking with you. Seriously.
Come take over everything from your humanity.
Come, man, say it straight. Man, don't listen to BBC. Man, don't listen to ITV.
I really do not admire speaking with you. Seriously.
Why?
Because it's time wasting. But
what?
The question is, the Islamic law, is it only Hanbali?
No.
Number one. We have three more mazhabs, plus more issues it can be ruled from outside the mazhab. Do you agree on this?
Yeah.
Yeah? So it is not really narrowed to the way you are saying. Secondly, within the Hanbali mazhabs, you can have more than one rulings about the very same matter or not.
Yep.